with Renee.
Yo. We wait all week and all day for more Saturdays with Renee.
What's up, world? Welcome to.
You gotta warn me. You can't do that.
So I figured, we'll have a little fun with the intro, and if it's from the ask for forgiveness as opposed to for permission. So if it don't work, it's a work in progress. But I just wanted to have a little fun and add a little bit to the intro. So, but welcome everybody to episode 44 of Saturdays with Renee, right here on Black Liberation. I'm Jared Ball, and of course, Renee Johnston is your host. And yes, Tafari says it exactly right. Demonetized but never compromised.
There we go.
So
we gotta add. You might need to add that to the end of the letter.
I think so. That's the call. So as it is Black August, and we would say free the land, free them all. What's the call? Free them all. I think Tafari has it as far as Black Liberation Media is concerned. Demonetized, never compromised. Definitely. And the point is, we are permanently demonetized, but not compromised and pushing forward. So there will be some changes, some adjustments, but the short of it is we still here. We still doing our thing. You can support us through Patreon. The link is in the show description. We'll be developing other ways to support materially, but you can always just continue to show up, like, share, subscribe. We'll still be here and doing the work. So we have to make this announcement before we get to our guest, right? That part of what we're doing as a response to this permanent demonetization, and we'll come back and sort of repeat this later, is we're going to start creating satellite channels that would ultimately, I think, become part of what would be a Black Liberation Media Network. And the first among them is the Remix Morning Show channel. So it's still going to be here on Black Liberation Media, but for a time, there's going to be a simulcast to the new channel, and we're going to be asking people to register, subscribe, and sign up over there so that we can start qualifying that channel for to be monetized and everything else. So
why don't you drop the link?
I am. Yep. About to pull that out now.
Jumping ahead.
No. I'm no, it's all good. But that was it. I just wanted to get that out of the way. And the link will be in the show description. I'll also be dropping it in the chat. And please start doing all of that sort of migrating and sharing.
Yes, sir.
Permanent demonetization. Yes. So there will be a statement coming out. There will be a couple statements coming out, one specific to this, but the 90-day warning turned into permanency with the sort of routine lack of clarity from Google. It was for community guidelines. It was for what I will say, I think it's fair to say it was for content posted to the channel that never aired on the channel and was not produced by anyone with the channel. So we want to be clear. This was not us being careless. We understand where we are, what we're doing. So we are, so that's, so more to come on that. And we appreciate all of your support. And, so again, the Remix channel will still be plugged into it is this collective. So when you support the channel over there, you are supporting this collective, both materially and otherwise. So it's you know, so there's the link.
That's the link. And the ask this morning is that people very quickly just jump and subscribe.
Yes.
Because in order for us to go live and to kind of escape whatever constraints YouTube could try to make, we need to be at 50 subscribers. So I made the big pronouncement. So you gotta make sure that you prove me right, that if we stay it during this show on Saturday, we would definitely be at 50 subscribers by the time.
Yes, that's right. Renee called you all out.
I did.
No, it's with confidence.
Saturdays will do it. Saturdays will do it. They'll get us to 50. So
right. So the link is in the show description. Sorry, Renee, go ahead. Sorry.
No, you're good. You're good. Go.
Just that the link is in the show description. It's in the chat. Please take a moment as we're getting started here, and as you see this throughout the show, and subscribe. Again, it will still be here, but we're also going to start building that and perhaps other satellite channels. So, stay tuned.
This is an experiment. We're going to see how this works with trying to get folks on to see how the live stream, if we can manage it, and then we'll go from there. But you know,
and Patreon.
Patreon. Yes, correct. Both. So we are asking folks to, one, if you had previously been subscribed on YouTube and that was how you were materially supporting Black Liberation Media, we are requesting that you move that support to our Patreon.
Sorry, one clarification. Sorry about that, Renee. But you said subscribe. Just want to be clear. We want you to stay subscribed to this channel.
Correct.
But if you had a membership,
correct,
and we're making a financial contribution through your membership to this channel, please move that to Patreon. Please also subscribe to the Remix channel.
Yes.
That's so. I just wanted to be clear.
The multiple asks.
But we know you all are up to it, though.
They on it. Somebody said it's already up to 30. So we good. We're good. Look. See, I said it. I said it.
Boom. Boom. You did. You called it. Renee called it. She said we're gonna be there quickly.
Whew. Yeah.
So that's
y'all.
Beautiful. Hey, 50 subscribers. It's there already.
It's done.
So thank you all very much.
Thank you very, very, very much. Very much.
That was dope.
For your tremendous support, you're gonna get a really good show today.
Because we was about to say nah. We was about to give you some bull. No, just play it.
So why don't we bring Ed in now, and then we can do all the things with Ed, because Ed has quickly become my guy. I can't even tell you. Me and Ed chat sometimes, and he blows my mind every time we have a conversation. So before we get into all the things, Ed, would you so kindly take a few minutes and introduce yourself to our audience and let them know what you do and why you're here?
Sure, appreciate it. And pressure's on, I guess, now, you know. Hey, everyone, friends, comrades. I'm Ed Vogel. I use he, him pronouns. I work for an organization called the Surveillance Resistance Lab, where I do research and I organize around questions of surveillance in schools, digital IDs, police tech. And then I'm also a member of a group out of Chicago called Lucy Parsons Labs, where I do a lot of work on police tech as well, in Chicago, around the country. I'm a part of the Chicago Stop Shot Spotter campaign, a part of the National Stop Shot Spotter coalition, steering committee for the coalition. I'm helping to grow and develop a national coalition that's focused on license plate readers, specifically a company called Flock Safety that has grown substantially over the last few years. Happy to talk more about that. And then also helping to build sort of a mutual aid and power building collective for folks on electronic monitoring in Chicago called Free Us. And that is becoming electronic monitoring is certainly growing in terms of its use across the country, especially in Chicago, as a extension of incarceration in other ways. And we're trying to start to build power among the several thousand people that are on EM in Cook County to try to challenge EM. I started doing prison abolitionist organizing in Chicago 15 years ago. Started doing surveillance work around 2017. And I started doing this work. My father went to prison when I was a kid, and coming to learn about his incarceration and sort of my family's experience with it, making sense of it growing up, revealed a lot to me about sort of how white supremacy operates in this country and my own personal relationship to it. So really appreciate being here. Humbled that I was asked to be here. Much respect for both of you. And hopefully I can add to the conversation that y'all have been, that you host over every week.
Listen, you just did. You just, I'm like your intro. You just. Generously. Listen. So Ed and I actually quasi-connected because of the map, because the map has become the map. So Ed, I'm going to ask you to bear with us for a few minutes because I got really mad at somebody about how they used my map.
Yikes.
And normally we've had this conversation, Jared and I. Jared is not thrilled with the fact that I don't really force people to talk about where the map is from and who did the map. I don't, and we've had this. It was never really about me specifically as much as it was about getting the information out regarding what was happening. That said, what happened recently was a video about cop cities where the host was, discussing their perspective, and they put up a screenshot of the map. It was clipped in such a way that there would be no way to know what the website was, where the database was, where the data set was, where the methodology was, none of it. And then the host proceeded to disparage the work. And so I was not thrilled with that. So Jared, on the run sheet is the link to Legia Miller's post, her video, and the time stamp. Right, so you already got it. So we're gonna watch it's less than a minute for what she did. And then we're going to talk about this whole attribution and my writing about this and why I decided to take this on in this moment.
You may have seen this map, which purports to reflect all the so-called cop cities that have been built, planned, started, or opened since 2020. The name is a little misleading. As the Stop Cop City movement has spread, the term cop city is getting thrown around whenever a municipality chooses to fund any new construction for its police. It includes this $4.4 million police station in Ellsworth, Maine, its first new police station in 90 years. It boasts outlandish amenities, including a conference room, a break room, and separate locker rooms for men and women. It's also one of the few sites on the map renovating an existing structure instead of building from scratch. So how did it end up in the same category as Atlanta's 85-acre behemoth? Like we've discussed, the term cop city comes from activists, often those who are either full-blown abolitionists or at least in favor of defunding the police. From the perspective of someone who doesn't believe cops should exist, let alone receive additional funding, any spending on police is considered a slap in the face, which is likely why so much of
it's all good. You can, yeah. Wait.
I'm sorry, because I missed this the first time because I didn't pay it enough attention. Sorry, but you saw the shirt, right?
So, but the shirt is actually a diss against Reagan.
Oh, so, is it?
Yeah, it is. I think it's like Reagan stuff or something like that. I don't remember. Yeah, it's not praise of Reagan. It's
okay.
Yeah, it's a negative.
Because you know he died during our wedding.
I know.
I just like to remind you that all the time. All the time.
But so normally right? And things happen as they happen. And normally when the map comes up and people share and they share the link, but it's not associated with me or the show or whatever, I kind of just like leave it alone. But her take on this was so bad that I felt like I had to do something and I had to respond to it. And of course, because Jared is the king of petty, he was all on board. He was like, get him. So for those of you who follow my Substack, you probably saw the article that I wrote. Did I remember to drop the Substack link in there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So I did decide to write about it. And so I posted an article on my Substack requesting that people stop trying to define cop cities. And as you all know from our multiple conversations, the spreading of the police state across the nation for me is important enough that I am adamant about not trying to define what communities should see as problematic. And so, the quote that starts this article, "To define is to limit," which is from Oscar Wilde, was like perfect, right? Because the point of the map was not to say that all these facilities are like Atlanta. The point of the map was to point out to people how much investment was being made into expanding policing across the country in a way that really and truly is unnecessary, given the state of what's happening in this country right now. So I've been routinely asked to define cop city. Every interview I've done since this map came out has come with the question like, well, define it. What is a cop city? So I actually went back into the website and added a clause for why there's no definition. But specifically regarding this piece, this video that was made, she points to the facility that was built in Maine. And people do this. She's like the third person who tried to do this to me. And I've realized that they did not actually go into the database or read any of the articles or take note of any of the information prior to deciding like, oh, well, this is stupid. It's just a $4 million project. So in this article, I actually outline specifically about Ellsworth, Maine, why people who live in Ellsworth or who live in communities surrounding Ellsworth might find this problematic. So Jared, if you scroll down a little bit, there's a picture of like the geographical map. Keep going. It's down where the information about Ellsworth is. That was me. I probably need to put a picture on there. So the circle is where Ellsworth is. You can see how close it is to Canada. It is coastal. It's close to Augusta, which is the capital of Maine. And it's like 2 hours from Portland, which is the largest city in Maine. Now, Maine in general is a highly, highly white population. I think the state is like less than 10% non-white. But at the same time, geographically, I found this to just be interesting that this random like town in Maine, right, with, I will note, like less than 9,000 people. There's like 8,000 plus people living in this city in Maine. That people don't think it odd that a city of that size went from housing their police department in their city hall in a space of like 1,200 square feet to taking over a massive 8,400 square foot facility in the city that wasn't owned by the city. So that $4.4 million was going to multiplying the size of their police department by 7 for a town with 8,000 and something people. And the cost of $4.4 million, the majority of it is to pay to lease the building from some corporation. So like $3.9 million of the amount is for the cost of leasing the building. So all of these things, when you put it all together, it should make somebody question, like, well, why the hell is this thing going there? What is the point? Is it the geographic? Is it because, I don't know, if you go to the Atlas of Surveillance, you realize that Maine has like exponentially increased its surveillance since 2021. Could that be why? Like, there's all these questions that could be asked. And the fact that she did not ask those questions, to me, says two things. One, she didn't even bother to like read the sources that were associated with this particular space on the map. And two, even if she did, she didn't even take the time to dig a little bit more and get some understanding of Ellsworth itself, of Maine, of all those other things. And she simply just brushed it off as if like, well, this is stupid that it's on there because, you know, it has these outlandish amenities. Like, I mean, of course, every police department has those things, but do they need it in an 8,400 square foot facility? Like, these are the things that I want people to question and to talk about and to understand, instead of just picking a place that she felt like didn't belong there because all she sees as a cop city is what's similar to Atlanta. And people get killed all the time in places with very small police departments. Like, this is not about nitpicking and trying to predetermine, well, which one is a problem and which one is, it is all a problem. It's all a problem. And it should all be a problem for all of us. Because as every year, the number of people who get killed by police increases, people should be wondering, why are we still putting so much money and resources into, you know, basically bolstering this police state? So I appreciate you all indulging. It's not really petty. You told me once, Jared, like, don't call it petty, call it principled. So I was so frustrated because, and, you know, I've gotten some word that she's a little, you know, she's like a liberal and a Democrat supporter, and she's all about Kamala, which we'll get to in a little bit also. You'll love this part, Ed. No, but, you know, I had to do it because I did not, the cropping of the map and the preventing of people from going to see the actual research, from looking at the data set, from finding their own resources about it, like, all of that is lost. And when you lose all of that, you also lose the politic and the reason that I did all that work to begin with, which was simply to get people to understand what was happening with the expansion of the police state in the country. So
that's my part. I honestly couldn't care less what she has to say about the map or your work. All she would have had to do is say, I got this map from Renee. Here's the link to her Substack. You can see her show. All the links are there. And then proceed to do all that she was doing in the video. And I would have zero problem with it. Then we could even maybe respond and, you know, have a discussion that way. My only issue is that you ended with. And so no, it's not petty. It's absolutely principled, because if she was concerned about the actual topic and discussion, she would be interested in why you reached your conclusions. Why is this woman out of nowhere making a map? And even if I disagree with how she's defining it, what is her argument? What is her reasoning behind it? And then let's build from there. And then, like I said, here's, you know, put the source. And I honestly don't know if she put it in the show description of her video or not, but she should have.
She did not, because I looked.
Okay.
She did not.
She should have overtly called to it in the video and included reference to it in her on-screen discussion. So that's the stuff I find. That's them being petty. I mean, it's not petty to call it out. That's them. I mean, because honestly, doing the slight little bit of editing that I do, you kind of got to go out of your way to take away attribution. So it's like effort to crop your, you know what I mean? Like, it's not
right.
A quick
and in the article,
paste, it's there.
Right. And on my Substack, I purposely cropped the page so that you could see how simple it would have been for her to include the website title. Like, it would have been like, it was like another 50 pixels and it would have been there. And so this was intentional. But the map is what brought me to Ed. So we're going to circle back to Ed now. So because the map is what brought me to Ed. And Ed has been doing some phenomenal background research, and he is an expert in finding information about monies and who's behind things. So Ed, can you talk about, like, you know, when we first met and talked over the phone, we were discussing like trying to track down the background of these cop cities and who's behind them and the financing and all these other things. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that looks like, some of the things you found, some things that people might want to understand about like what's behind this expansion of the police state?
Yeah, definitely. You know, much respect, obviously, for the map that you put together. So I had been part of a group of folks that had been in the process of also sort of researching and trying to put together a map. And then, you know, Renee dropped hers and we're like, oh, okay, great. So was able to connect and start the conversation from there. And, you know, I think in terms of your question, Renee, one, I think a good example, and I could share the link for this. I traced out sort of the background decision-making on the Nashville project, which is a state Department of Corrections project, $450 million, if I remember correctly. Maybe it's a little bit less. You know, there was an announcement about breaking ground on the facility maybe a little bit less than a year ago. And there were a lot of questions from folks in Nashville about this. And I went and kind of hunted down and found the kind of the decision-making process at the state level for it, and ended up going through multiple years of meeting minutes for the State Building Commission. It's as boring as it sounds, but the meeting minutes for the State Building Commission to trace out when they started thinking about this plan and devoting money to it. And it turns out it was the first minutes I found for it were in 2016. So, you know, this is also a good question as we think about sort of the development of cop cities, the long plans that state officials, corporations have had in terms of building these out. And I can drop my research; folks can see it.
If you want to drop it into the private chat, we can share it out. And then if there's something Jared can pull up now, we can actually pull it up.
Yeah.
Yeah. I because I'm anti-surveillance, folks, I use a tool called Rise Up Pad for this. I have it linked, the decisions and the notes from the meeting minutes in there, and the public documents. I submit a lot of public records requests because.
But it is okay to share this.
Yeah, please. It's
okay.
intended to be public.
All right. Yeah.
And folks can, you know, if happy to talk through, if anyone that's attending here wants to do additional research and poke around on any other projects, happy to talk through this and map some of this out with y'all too. Much of the research I do, as I named, was is around surveillance, and that's part of what led me to being able to figure out some of this too, in terms of understanding how a lot of different surveillance technologies are being adopted by different public agencies. Part of the work is knowing sort of the back end decision-making processes that aren't necessarily always transparent or public in this, in the same way that surveillance isn't, and how the tools are used. So being able to kind of figure out how decisions are made, who has the authority, what those processes are, and then being able to hunt down those documents via anything that's just online, open source research, but also public records requests. It's unfortunately, it's increased as a skill that we have needed in movement building, as other people, journalists, sort of journalism as an industry has been decimated by corporate takeovers and whatnot. There's a lot less work happening on this. So I very much come out of a organizing space where we do a lot of this kind of research. But But this is just one example of how this kind of mapping this out and being able to look at, I think, the longer history and the political economy of each project and the context of each project, everything that you were naming, Renee, with the main project, and why, you know, a $4 million project there may seem insignificant, but if, you know, without understanding the context and putting it in that context, you're not actually understanding how this is infrastructure that's being constructed to build a police state in different ways and evolve it in different ways. So, but yeah, happy to talk through more about this if you know, if you have any specific questions around this research.
Yeah, I just, you know, I'm glad you explained how far back that Nashville project goes, because that's also what I discovered, that a lot of the facilities that are on the map, it wasn't that the initial idea started after 2020. It was almost that 2020 was the catalyst to push an idea that had been long-standing out into the forefront and into a space where people were willing to even like discuss it and actually make it be, you know, make it happen. So one of the things that I think people, I don't want to say don't understand, because I think most people don't even think about it, right? Like I don't think I even understood how opaque council meetings and, you know, board meetings and all these things were until I was trying to figure out, like, why is there a $400 million facility going up in Newark, New Jersey? And why are they building over a school that burned down when all the schools are failing? Like, you know, and so I started trying to dig into the records, and it is messy, right? Like you find one thing and there's an addendum, and the addendum says something, and it's pointing to a lease of a space that was purchased and sold, and like there's all this madness behind it, right? So can you maybe try, and I don't know, maybe this is an unfair question, so if it's something that's too like tricky to try and answer, just say like, that's a bizarre question, Renee. So can you try and explain to people, like, when you're trying to find this information, it's intentionally opaque, right? So like, how is there a best method? Like if they, you know, to like if you start here and you find this thing, then, you know, try and walk this path. And so like, do you have like a method when you go into these things to find information? Or is it just like, for me, some of it was just luck, right? Like I just caught something and I was like, well, let me Google that. And then I found it. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think, you know, and maybe putting it in terms of surveillance technologies, which, you know, the procurement processes for these are very opaque, very little public discussion, very little public awareness oftentimes. And I think that is intentional, of course. And I think it's also a symptom of what sort of the nexus of power between state agencies, police agencies, and corporations, how sort of the increasing use of surveillance tech is you know, creating more power, building more power at that nexus between the state and corporations, and sort of building and you know, worsening the asymmetry of power between us and them in that way. You know, making the violence that is felt, especially by, you know, Black and brown folks, poor folks, much more acute. I think you know, there's very little information usually about how that looks. And I think, again, you know, it's starting with figuring out the decision-making. So I always look for, I mean, I kind of go through this in a few ways. One is I look for, you know, contracts. What are the official agreements that are in place? Get contracts, get data sharing agreements, but also get, you know, via public records requests, try to get manuals and try to get other training materials and other documents that the agencies use to, they're intended to use to frame how they use the technology, right? You know, policies, that kind of thing. So I try to get all those documents. Another thing that I like to do is I also try to get a lot of communications, emails and whatnot between folks who, are in police departments, other agencies, along with corporate vendors, and then other folks, just see who they're in communication with, and to try to sort of do a network analysis around who is in conversation with who about this, and who's making these decisions, whether they're public decisions or not. So one is to, get their official documents, but then also just to see how they're using it and who's talking to who and who's making decisions. I think to your point around the sort of opaqueness, part of I think Cop City, the Atlanta project is really interesting with this. And obviously I can't say too much about this, but I'm a plaintiff on a lawsuit against the Atlanta Police Foundation with the Atlanta Community Press Collective right now, where we are suing to make the Atlanta Police Foundation subject to public records requests under the argument that they're performing a government function via all of these contracts that they have for Cop City, as well as the surveillance tech that they have. I'm interested in the surveillance tech. That's not a part of the lawsuit, but I'm interested in the surveillance tech as well that they contract for and then allow the Atlanta Police Department to use. But we have to, sue in order to get access to these documents, because they were established as an infrastructure to make this even more opaque, right? To make it even more difficult to understand how they are operating, and then how they are allowing the police to use the tools that they are acquiring for them. So, and the group that I work with, that I'm named out of Chicago, Lucy Parsons Labs, we a few years ago, we won a lawsuit against an institute at the University of Chicago called the Crime Lab, who has been a strong partner with the Chicago Police Department for multiple years, numerous contracts at the police department. We won a lawsuit against them for the same argument, making them subject to public records requests because they are performing a government function. So I think that is one thing, just to name that there's infrastructure that's being constructed to try to make this more opaque. Not only a 501c3 with the Atlanta Police Foundation, the University of Chicago, but also just the vendors and corporations who provide these different technologies and offer the different tools that are being used. So, and I think that's also notable and interesting. And we could talk more about that as it relates to different companies. I had a public records request that I just got back this other week, where I asked for a set of searches that police officers performed using their license plate reader software. And this is, it's an audit log, and it's a standard thing in software that you can usually see how a user of a software is using it, and you can see all their everything they've done in the software, and it's standard. It's part of every software. The response that I got back was that database is owned by the company and we don't have access to it. So I think that's also an interesting question in terms of the relationship of police, corporations, state agencies, and all of this.
Wild. Yeah. Is the Crime Lab that huge facility that got built, or is that a different in outside of Chicago, like in Chicago? Is that the same one in the same? Because that place was the de-escalation training also. I can't remember the name of the org that's behind it, but is it the same thing or no?
No. So yeah, the Crime Lab is an institute that was started at the University of Chicago several years ago. It's one of multiple institutes under the what are they called? The Urban Labs. And yeah, we could talk more about that. It's probably not worth the time, but it's very much the way in which academics package and repackage, scientific racism in different ways, right? But there is a new Cop Academy in Chicago that was constructed, finished a couple years ago. That was started, I think in 2017, or the announcement of it was in 2017, and some great organizing to try to challenge it from a few different groups in the city. And then there's also, at the Chicago Police Department headquarters, there's also sort of the Fusion Center, which is another sort of data sharing warehouse center. That there was a comment earlier that referenced Fusion Centers and Brandon McQuaid's work on it. But there's, the different infrastructure in the city for different purposes in terms of building the police apparatus.
And it's interesting, Chicago too, because that is one of the most segregated cities in the country when you think about, Sorry, Jared, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that I remember the Fusion Centers first really being brought to my attention during the uprisings after Freddie Gray was killed in Baltimore. And they seemed to be highly involved there, the one they were building there in Maryland, and then and then also in that still really, to me, spooky the claims around how the police violence and the uprising started with the whole Mondawmin Mall incident and the youth and all of that. There was a lot of funkiness going on. A lot of police were around. A lot of folks from out of town were already in place when the kids were getting pulled off the bus. So it was like, how was this a response to that? The claims around this high school threats that were white supremacists were going to target Black kids coming out of school. The unattributed tweets claiming that. I mean, it was really wild. And all around that was just, here's that Fusion Center. So,
Yeah. So the Fusion Center network is certainly a concern. I think it epitomizes the growing use of data and reliance on data by police, of course. One thing that I want to name that I think is important, sort of just broadly about surveillance, is that, any technology that's adopted by a public agency has the capacity to be used for carceral purposes. So it's not simply technologies adopted by police, but technologies adopted and used in non-police agencies have the ability to be used for a policing function. And I think that's something that's really important to name and to think about. Which is, part of the work that I do in terms of thinking about the tools used in schools, not just cameras, not just other sort of obvious physical surveillance tools, but also, and Renee and I have talked about some of the student activity monitoring, but also some of the ed tech work or technologies that are used, and how those are designed, especially by the vendors, to create massive, those are huge data extraction tools, but they're also designed to try to, long-term, the focus and vision for ed tech vendors is to make teachers and educators into contingent labor, to sort of gigify teaching through by creating personalized learning for students, which is something that I'm sure a lot of parents have heard. And happy to talk more about all of this, but all the data that is collected by these different technologies, there's certainly a possibility for it to be shared and used by police as well. There's there's some great work done in Pasco County, Florida, where the Pasco County Sheriff's Department, great work challenging this, the Pasco County Sheriff's Department access student databases from the local school district in order to make a predictive policing algorithm, more or less. And there's been some great work done by different or local groups there to challenge this, to identify it, but then challenge it, and to illustrate how the student information data and the different data collected by the school district has become a tool for predictive analytics for policing. So that is something to be aware of, as well as I named digital IDs earlier, something that's rolling out across the country right now that I'm doing a lot of work on is the introduction of digital driver's licenses. Folks may have heard about these. These are pitched as tools of convenience that you can just keep your driver's license on your phone in your digital wallet, that kind of thing. The actors that are behind digital driver's licenses, this is a program from the Department of Homeland Security. Congress gave the Department of Homeland Security the authority to determine the technical standards for these systems to ensure that more or less that DHS has access to the databases that are being collected and developed by the DMVs who are issuing these tools. So, again, a technology being deployed via a DMV, but the data and the infrastructure on the back end is in place for this to be a tool for policing. With the goal, obviously, of having everyone hold their digital driver's license in their digital wallet, on their phone, creating the possibility for just mass surveillance and tracking that not only marries your location, but also your identity, your legal identity to that at all times. So, all the technologies that we can think about in terms of ShotSpotter, license plate readers, facial recognition technology that police use, these are also, these are data broker companies that collect data and basically sell it, lease it to police. But I think we should also be keenly aware of the other technologies that are being deployed in other agencies and what their capacity is for policing, especially in a neoliberal police state that we operate in.
And I know one of the things that and I don't know why I was surprised, because duh, right? But like, in poking around on that Atlas's surveillance site, realizing that the door cameras, that Amazon is they're shared with the police departments. So you put this ring thing on your door, and it's supposed to be for your convenience, so who's coming to your door, and you can see if somebody takes things or whatever. And it's all looped into the police department so that they can track your neighbors and they can track what's happening in your community. And it's a huge surveillance web that, I never wanted one of those things. It's just not my way. But the amount of people who have them, and wondering to myself, do you know that you're feeding into the police state just by having this thing that was sold to you as a convenience, right?
Right.
So it's amazing.
Yeah.
But while we talk about technology, so Ed also blew my mind, because Jared and I last week, as you all may remember, discussed the report that was written by Alec Karakatsanis. I think I got his name right this time. I've been practicing. And the body cameras. And Ed said to me in an email, he missed some stuff. And I was like, what? What did he miss? So can we talk about that? Because I am super curious about what was not discussed in that report that you realized as you were reading it.
Well, so to Alec's credit, it's a great report. It's a great document. I don't want to come off as being petty or, but anyways, it's a great report. I think what I would say that I think is sort of limited to a certain degree in his framing in that is, I think, situating the growth of body-worn cameras within the longer history of sort of the industry that has been constructed around police tech, but also understanding it within the evolution of the data economy. One thing that I think that I'm working on right now myself that I think is sort of under theorized at this point is sort of how the data economy is evolving the prison industrial complex and expanding it by creating more opportunities for revenues for different companies in it, beyond just sort of police and warehousing, but there are other ways that companies can enter in and build their little fiefdoms. And I think that is something that, he names with the growth of Axon, but I think it's important to situate it more broadly in terms of the growth of the industry, as well as I think, you know, I think one thing that he does a good job of is also really talking about the data, right? You know, all of these companies, I kind of alluded to it earlier, all of these companies, Axon, SoundThinking, Motorola, Clearview, all of these companies are data brokers for police. And what I mean by that is all they do is they collect data, right? They have no ability to, despite their claims, they have no ability to prevent crime or stop crime or deter crime. They just simply collect data. And, you know, when we look at the long history of the growth of the police tech industry, you know, starting in like the late 60s, early 70s, it was really about creating databases. Databases are the most banal form of surveillance. So as the federal government funded corporations to work oftentimes at the state level to create these databases, over time, what this has done is created sort of a demand for tools that can collect data. And that's what we have now. All of these technologies that are being deployed without any research around whether or not they work, quickly being adopted by police and deployed to collect different kinds of data, whatever it might be. You know, license plate scans, faces, loud sounds in the case of ShotSpotter. And so, and then I think the other piece of this too, that I will give him credit for, but he, you know, I don't think he explicitly named, is what this means is, in terms of police power, you know, what data is, right? Knowledge. This is knowledge production. So what these tools do, what these technologies do, is they sort of manufacture criminality, and they allow the police to do that. You know, in the case of ShotSpotter, for example, we, you know, in the organizing we're doing around it, we talk about it as being a probable cause generator. What it does is it collects the data on a loud sound, and then it initiates a police deployment and gives police coverage to go to the area and stop and frisk anyone that's in the area. And that, you know, research has shown in Chicago that there is a high correlation between a ShotSpotter deployment and the use of stop and frisk. So it's very much a tool of manufacturing criminality, and very much a tool of manufacturing hegemony, and, you know, reinforcing hegemony in that way. So all of these tools are very coercive in terms of how they're deployed by police, and the sort of the limited range of options that are given in terms of ways to respond to violence, respond to, you know, things that are happening in communities in a way that doesn't involve and require the police, right? So they reinforce police power by extracting power from communities, and agency from the communities, and being able to determine how they want to respond to crime, violence, whatever might happen in a community. So, so I think Alec did a really good job of documenting the long history, or the longer history of body-worn cameras, but I think it would have been a stronger piece if he situated that within the longer history of police tech in general. And then if he was maybe more explicit around some of the manufacturing of criminality in that way.
That manufacturing, that probable cause generator is probably the wildest, like, I mean, that is wild. And it's such a great, I hate to say the word great for it because it's freaking sick, but like, that is so wild that, you know, and I know that's the problem behind that ShotSpotter thing, right? Like I understood the basic dynamics of why there was an issue, especially, you know, it's leading to people getting killed, like most things involving police do. But that's That's a wild. I hadn't actually, until you said it that way, I hadn't actually thought about data in that context as a means to generate a reason to send someone with a gun to a place to harass community members.
Yep. Yeah. So it gives that justification, and not, I think this is also why we should be thinking about technologies not being used by police agencies as well, but perform a policing function. So, one thing that's happening in New York City right now, I don't know if anyone here is from New York City, but Mayor Adams, former NYPD officer himself, he, during his campaigning, one thing that he said he wanted to do was CompStat the city. I think folks from a certain generation, maybe from New York, understand what the term CompStat means, right? So he wanted to CompStat the city.
And Wire fans might recognize it as well.
Sure.
It was a big issue in the series there for a minute. Sorry. Yeah.
No, yeah. So so this is what he said he wanted to do, is CompStat the city. And we're starting to see this in different ways. One thing that he has introduced recently is a digital portal for the distribution of public benefits in New York City called My City. And My City is its deployment is not going very well, according to the timeline that he said that it would be released on and implemented on. But in February of 2023, New York City's chief technology officer, someone by the name of Matt Frazier, who also is a former NYPD officer, he was testifying at a city council committee hearing about My City. And one of the things he said was part of the goal of My City was be able to understand the way in which people on public benefits are spending their money, because they want to reward people for purchasing vegetables, which is wild in itself. But of course, the question comes is, what does the NYPD officer also want to do for people who, don't purchase vegetables? What does that look like, right? So, very clear about the city's intent in terms of surveilling how people are using their public benefits. Part of the deployment of the My City portal is also a city-developed digital wallet with a corporate vendor called Mocafy, Mobility Capital Finance, a fintech vendor. And fintech is very much a part of sort of programs of smart cities, which are very much designed to extract data, extract profit from poor people in order to allow poor people to access public benefits and public services. So the way in which Mocafy operates is that if they have a digital wallet, or they offer the digital wallet, if you log into their digital wallet and use their online properties, as they call them, they're very explicit in terms of the different data that is extracted from you, the different data they take and they sell, oftentimes to data brokers, in order for you to access your public benefits, or you to access whatever funds are coming to you in that way via the digital wallet. So this is a technology that's being constructed right now via a contract, a $5 million contract that Mocafy has with the city of New York, to be integrated into the distribution of public benefits via the My City portal. All of this is being orchestrated, of course, by all these former NYPD officers. I saw you, yeah.
Yeah, no, I was well because is there so well I'll ask what I wrote down. Is there a crypto component to this fintech and data mining? Have you seen any overlap of that? Because we've talked about it on this platform before, that one of the lesser discussed elements of cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, et cetera, and so forth, and why so many in the colonized world are being invited to participate, is because underneath it all, despite all the claims to anonymity and blockchain, is this data mining element where people are being invited to give themselves over through all of these fintech. And we kept hearing about all these fintech, particularly Black related fintech companies that are supposed to reach out to the Black community and then bring them in. And then underneath it are these very white investors, banks, et cetera, capital. So I'm just wondering, have you seen, or is this a totally separate?
Yeah, spot on. I mean, I believe Eric Adams wanted to introduce a New York City cryptocurrency. So
I think I missed that part.
Yeah, it's very much about making everything we do legible to the state, but also making it profitable to corporations and capitalists. So it's very much sort of at that nexus of power and interests that the state has to monitor everything that we do, but also to profit from it. So I lost my train of thought, but yes.
Is it related to the link you shared?
So the link I shared is an analysis that we did around my city, and there's some more information in there that I think folks should look through and be aware of, because I think this is a bit of the trajectory of the ways in which these different technologies, again, not being deployed by police agencies, but for the purposes of policing and expanding the access and surveillance of policing agencies into different public services, public benefits, public programs.
Can you quickly, just because somebody did ask, and I don't want to jack it up trying to explain it the way I understand it, can you explain what CompStat means for people who are not familiar with the term?
Yeah, so CompStat is a program that was introduced by Bill Bratton and Jack Maples in the New York Police Department in roughly 1994. And basically, it is datafying everything the police do in order to, the goal is to be able to be more precise in how police are deployed in their activities and responding to patterns of crime and violence and whatever. This is, from the police perspective, this is the argument. So it's about increasing the use of data and datafying everything that police do in order to use police resources in a more precise way. Again, this goes back to, in terms of how it's been used, right? Marrying sort of CompStat policing with other police strategies that Bill Bratton is known for, such as broken windows policing. It's, using data gives justification, gives cause for, continuing violent racist police practices, such as stop and frisk, as was named earlier. So, and CompStat policing then has been sort of adopted widely throughout the country in response. More or less every police agency uses it now, and is just, again, collecting of data and using statistics for policing strategies and tactics. It is, in a lot of ways, it's a precursor to a lot of predictive policing tools that have been introduced throughout the years. Such as like Predpol. Predpol is probably the most notorious predictive policing company. They have been sort of since discredited and no longer exist, actually. Predpol, interestingly, the remnants of it were acquired and purchased by SoundThinking, which is the company that sells ShotSpotter, last year. So the ShotSpotter SoundThinking purchased the patents and then hired the remaining engineers from the company. SoundThinking also purchased another predictive policing company in 2018, I believe, called Hunch Lab. And Bill Bratton, the man himself, is on the board of SoundThinking, and is very much continuing his practices of developing sort of faux police strategy. under the veneer of data and objectivity with the company and with the company's funds. So one thing, for example, that is created now via sound thinking is this institute at the University of Cincinnati. I forget the name of it. It's run by or connected to this professor named Corey Haberman, but it's an institute around precision policing, focused on precision policing, which is Bill Bratton's sort of new police strategy, I guess, broadly to name it. But sound thinking put up the initial funds to fund this. Bill Bratton is, I think, the sort of the head of the advisory board for it. But it's very much, again, trying to co-opt. Yeah, that's a good link there. It very much intended to, sort of use the veneer of academic integrity and objectivity to justify and, further justify racist policing in different ways. So,
but don't we want? But the technology claims that is ShotSpotter claims that it can help locate where gunfire is coming from. And then don't we want precision policing just in general? Isn't that what all the protests have been about? So sure. What is it that they're actually doing beyond that promoted narrative? Is it like, how does this, or forgive me if I missed in what you've already said, but how does this translate into the racist policing and et cetera and so forth?
Sure. So
because they said transparency and accountability right here. So, I mean,
right.
Who wouldn't trust this face? I'm sorry.
Yikes. I can't. How ShotSpotter works is all ShotSpotter really is are microphones that are installed in communities that have a history of gun violence. So they're using historical data of gun violence to determine where to install microphones. And what they will claim is that the microphones will detect a sound. 3 microphones need to detect it. And it will triangulate the location of the sound. And when that happens, the sound will be is reviewed by ShotSpotter's machine learning algorithm, which determines if it's a gunshot or not, rather than a car backfiring or fireworks. And then if that machine learning algorithm says it is, it's then sent to a person. The company has 2 sort of call centers, human review centers, where somebody both listens to it, but also sees sort of a wave graph of it on their computer, where they then determine if it's a gunshot or not. They have the final authority. If they determine it's a gunshot, they then contact the local police agency or the local dispatch agency, who will then dispatch police to the location that the sound says, or that the company says the sound was came from. Training materials of the human reviewers from New York. Folks are able to obtain these, and basically, when in doubt, the human reviewer is told to assume it's a gunshot. So if they can't tell the difference, they then deploy cops. But the thing is, ShotSpotter's machine learning tool has never been independently tested, right? So they point to a variety of research to justify the company's claims and the efficacy, to justify the efficacy of the technology. Every report that they point to, they have paid for. The Policing Project did a review and audit. The Policing Project is an institute that's connected to NYU School of Law. They did an audit several years ago. In their audit, they had sort of lukewarm, a lukewarm analysis of ShotSpotter. But at the start of their audit, they're very clear that at the time of their performing this audit, the company was an annual donor to the policing project, as well as the CEO of the company, Ralph Clark, was on the advisory board. There's a number of other studies I could go through, but these are the studies they point to. So there has not been a study conducted, there's not been an independent study conducted of the actual algorithm and the tools that the company uses. In any independent study performed by an academic or other folks, whether journalists or lawyers, the evidence of the efficacy of the technology with anything that they claim has been inconclusive at best. The research in Chicago that we often point to the first research was conducted by a group called the MacArthur Justice Center. And they looked at 21 months of ShotSpotter alerts. And they compared those alerts to the sort of the police incident reports, the reports they have to submit when they are deployed. And they found that on roughly 90% of police deployments in Chicago, there was no evidence of a gun crime. 90% of ShotSpotter initiated deployments in Chicago over 21 months, there was no evidence of a gun crime. This has been
we should still feel good about being surrounded by cameras and microphones.
All right, that's it. We're not doing this show anymore. Y'all are like, we can't. What? Like, what?
Yes. And then the Office of Inspector General in Chicago, which is sort of the independent ombudsman for the city, they did the same research and they corroborated it. They actually found that it was 91%. And they also were the ones who identified the high correlation of the use of stop and frisk on those deployments. And I can, the company touts this 97% accuracy rate, and I could send a document that I got via public records request that outlines how this is calculated. But basically they just assume how they calculate this is they assume every sound that the microphones detect is a gunshot. And then they start to subtract different pieces from there. In terms of what they determine is not a gunshot, to get to this point to say that 90% of their alerts are in response to a gunshot. And I can send the formula. It's confusing, and it's confusing. It's intentionally confusing. But this is also part of what is notable about ShotSpotter, as well as other police surveillance companies, is that there aren't actually when a contract is signed and when a technology is deployed, there's nothing clearly defined in terms of a success metric for the technology. So what would it actually mean for ShotSpotter to be successful in any city it's deployed in? That's never defined. In fact, in the contract, in their service level agreements that they have in their contracts across the country, one of their success metrics is just that the system is on. It's running 90% of the time. Pretty wild. But every police technology company is like this. This isn't just ShotSpotter. ShotSpotter is easy to look at because I think the technology seems maybe more bogus. It's obviously more bogus than other technologies, but all of these technologies are the same in terms of its efficacy, and no substantial evidence for that and backing that up. And this is part of the last thing I'll say on this. I could go on and on, but the last thing I'll say on this is part of some of the current conflict or current fight in Chicago about ShotSpotter is that I think there is substantial evidence that shows ShotSpotter doesn't work. City council members still want to keep the contract and keep it in place, despite this evidence. And so there's a fight over this. And, I think what's clear about this and what I think is important to name as we think about technologies is that arguments over the efficacy and the data and whether or not this works, whether or not it is actually accurate, that is actually in the interest of the company. that, arguing over data is in the interest of the company, because in Chicago, the more we argue over ShotSpotter's efficacy, the less we're actually talking about gun violence and how we actually address gun violence and the root causes of it. So it's actually in the interest of the company for us to argue about its efficacy and the technology and the data, right? And I think everyone probably here knows this. So I'm not, not naming anything new, but I think when we look at these technologies, the thing that we need to think about is how are these technologies actually building and reinforcing power for the police, for the corporations? How are they serving those interests, rather than focusing on whether or not the technology actually works? Because it's actually much more illustrative to understand how power is operating than whether or not the technology is accurate.
Very well put. Very well put. And so one, I want to make sure that Alec Karakatsanis, if he ever sees this, knows that we vastly appreciate his work. And as you started to answer the question, it occurred to me that the way I asked it made it sound like we didn't think it was a good report. So that is definitely not what I was getting at. And I appreciate you starting to answer that way, because it called my attention to the way I asked the question.
You're good. Yeah.
I want to so he was invited. So I want to make sure that we don't mess up any potential visits.
Sure. It'd be great to have him.
He's phenomenal, and I really, his Substack's also really well done. On top of that, everything that you were just talking about, and I know you're not quite ready with the report you started to write about counterinsurgency and surveillance and how this all kind of plays in together. So, but Jared, did you want to ask a question before we get into this next piece on the counterinsurgency? Because Ed is in the process of pulling together a really good report that he doesn't think is ready, that I think is more ready than he thinks is ready. But I'd like him to kind of dig into a little bit on, because what you just said is also kind of one of the main purposes, I think, of what Alec's report was about, which was we are spending so much time looking at this small piece regarding the cameras, the body-worn cameras, like, oh, but you get this evidence, oh, but this, and then this lie with the accountability and all these things. And all of it is preventing the larger conversation of why is someone with a gun showing up to kill someone who is simply having, a mental health issue, or is trying to change their tire, or was smoking in a parked car where they weren't supposed to be. Like, all these things that don't have to result in death are resulting in death because the larger construct of policing is all fucked up, right? Sorry, mommy, but it's just all messed up. And so can we talk a little bit about that part of it? And then you can kind of dig into the counterinsurgency and some of the work that you're doing behind, like, what we should really be talking about as we're discussing these technologies.
Yeah, definitely. So, what I guess I started writing this piece, how cop cities and surveillance technologies are complementary counterinsurgency infrastructure. And how I started down this path is that in the summer of 2023, if I'm remembering correctly, the governor of Georgia, Brian Kemp, announced a grant program for public safety grants, where he would use $83.5 million of ARPA funds and distribute these across the state. And via public records requests, I've been getting the applications and the grant agreements, and to understand and map out what the funds are being used for. And most of the funds are being used for purchasing and acquiring different police technologies. And they're building out a broader police tech infrastructure outside of Atlanta, and sort of tying into, maybe for the most part, Metro Atlanta, and building out this sort of, again, apparatus. And I think I really want to stress this, because what I'm seeing is, and I think this is interesting, because I'm also trying to monitor this in other states, but is, roughly $90 million going to the construction of Cop City in Atlanta, $83.5 million going towards these grant programs. So not comparable amounts of money. And there are these smaller police agencies in and around Atlanta that are acquiring technologies, like the police department in Doraville. If anyone is familiar with Atlanta geography, Doraville, from what I understand, is sort of a tiny little suburb right outside Atlanta. The Doraville Police Department used their grant funds to acquire something called a gray shift technology. And gray shift is similar to something called Cellbrite. If folks are familiar with Cellbrite's an Israeli company. And what both of these companies sell is a tool that is designed to extract all of the data off of cell phones, off of phones, without actually logging into the phone or accessing the phone. So the police can take your phone, plug it into the system. It will copy the hard drive, copy all the data you have on that phone, and then they have access to it. So, not that any police agency should have one of these, but my thought is, what does this tiny little suburb Doraville need with this technology? And it seems like to me what the intention of this grant program is to build up the tools among multiple policing agencies so that the tools can be deployed and used, and the data can be shared throughout all of Atlanta and the counties and the state's policing apparatus, right? So, it's not difficult for me to imagine that the next time, if there was going to be a raid on the forest, with the forest defenders, someone's phone getting picked up and taken by the Doraville police, who then use their gray key, collect all the data off the phones of these folks. They hold the data, but then they're able to share all of that data among all the policing agencies around there through infrastructure like the Fusion Center and other data sharing networks that are built in and around Atlanta, as well as across the country. So in a lot of ways, these kinds of grant programs are intended to build the apparatus in order to sort of decentralize the technologies in order to collect and centralize data. So another common thing that is being purchased via these grant funds are license plate readers via an Atlanta company called Flock Safety. And license plate readers, what they more or less do, if folks aren't familiar, they're set up on the sides of roads, and they take a picture of and scan every license plate that drives past them at all hours of the day. That plate is then scanned against different hot lists and different databases where police claim this is, these are stolen cars, or these are cars that are involved in criminal activity, quote unquote. But the data for every car that is scanned is held for usually 30 days. That's what they publicly say, 30 days. And so they're building up mass databases of every car that is driving in and around Atlanta. This is happening across the country. Flock Safety actually touts that their national data sharing network and the amount of police that they have contracts with, you can, via their national sharing network, any customer of theirs, any police agency, could track the location of a car and its movement from San Francisco to Washington, D.C. And all of this is being held, in a database of a private company. So it's very difficult for us to get access to it. There's, they put up proprietary claims on it. So there's not a lot of legal ramifications or legal strategies that we can take right now, so on and so forth. Right. But anyways, so $83.5 million going to grants around Atlanta to build this apparatus out. Other states are doing similar strategies. I'm currently mapping in Illinois that the Illinois Attorney General has a retail theft crime grant where they are distributing funds across the state for the purchase of surveillance technologies. Flock is one. Fusus is another one. I saw somebody mention it in the chat earlier. Fusus is another Atlanta-based company that provides sort of a real-time crime center software, but also sells directly to consumers cameras like Ring. And these these cameras that Fusus sells, one of the things that they also offer, which is amazing, is at the point of sale, they ask the customer if they are willing to give police real-time access to the camera whenever the police want without a warrant. The only research that I've seen that documents how often customers do this was from Nashville, where 10% of the customers gave police real-time access to their Fusus cameras at the point of sale. So these contracts are being acquired in Illinois, building a similar infrastructure in the suburbs of Chicago, with license plate readers, with real-time crime center software, and the development of real-time crime centers, which are sort of like mini fusion centers. And it's happening elsewhere in Ohio, it's happening in California, it's happening elsewhere, in terms of not only federal funds flowing for this development, but the state activating state funds for it as well. In using things like prevention of retail crime theft as sort of the justification for it, even though, of course, the technologies that are being deployed will be used for much broader purposes than just retail theft.
So I almost don't even know what to say, Jared. So, you're also shaking your head. So
because it's so wild, because I just keep thinking of all the narratives that get developed around all of this to support all of this. So, for instance, the first thought that when you said to protect retail, the issue is that what they say is years ago, some students stole computer and projector equipment out of our school of communication. And the chair was trying to get me to cooperate with the police investigation of what were likely students.
Right.
And when I said no, the chair's response was, but if you don't, and this continues, then there is no school that can employ you to have a job to teach youngsters. So in other words, it becomes this whole thing that if we don't protect the retailers, the private sector can't, then businesses go out of business, people lose their jobs. That's part. So we're all invited to participate in our own surveillance at all moments, with this idea that, again, if you're not the terrorist, what do you have to be worried about?
Yep.
Wow.
And so my thought around all of this is that these technologies are being deployed and used in different ways to obviously monitor anyone who's a threat. That includes, obviously, always has included in the United States, Black folks, right? That includes undocumented folks, immigrants. And I think the big thing that I try to talk about within this is also that this is, a construction of an infrastructure of surveillance that can be deployed on different people as different people and their behaviors are criminalized. So license plate readers are a really interesting example of this, because the license plate readers were heavily adopted in the late, Flock Safety was founded in 2017. So since then, Flock Safety has blown the market up significantly. And then, with the Supreme Court decision changing the sort of the legality of abortion, license plate readers then became a critical tool that police are using for monitoring people who are crossing state lines seeking reproductive health care. So once the infrastructure of surveillance is constructed, it can be deployed on different people as different groups of people and behaviors are criminalized. So when we're thinking about counterinsurgency and we're thinking about the surveillance technologies, we should be keenly paying attention to how new behaviors are being criminalized in that way. I saw the comment in the chat up from Craig around FUSIS. Yes, FUSIS in Nashville. There was a effort to come together to get rid of it. I think that's obviously great. I will say, Craig, I am very certain that FUSIS is in conversations with the police department and city council members behind closed doors at this point. So I think it's worthwhile to continue to try to challenge FUSIS in that city.
Wow.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because this is a big thing that I've been finding, and even when I circle back to like links and places where the cop city, that I found back in February, and like circling back, is what I see happen often is, the community comes out, they say, no, we don't want this thing. They don't vote for the bond, whatever the step is. And then the people, the leadership circumvents that decision, and they just find some other way to push it through. They shift it to another location. Literally, and I wish I could remember the name of the city now, but if it might have been Colorado Springs. And they were like, okay, the bond didn't get voted for. We'll just find another way to fund it. Like, it was literally like, okay, whatever, like, we'll just figure it out. And I think it's important for people who are organizing around these things to remember that the goal is not to be stopped. So even when you think you've stopped something, it would behoove everyone in that area to continue to watch what's happening, because these ghouls, they'll just circle back and find another way to like make it happen in some other form that maybe organizers weren't prepared for, or whatever have you. And I think that's a big thing to kind of be mindful of as people are really contemplating how they fight this system and how they work within their community to undo something that they're trying to do.
Yep. The capital is going to flow to the path of least resistance. And so it will find its way to introduce these technologies. If it can't via local procurement contracts, then these statewide grant programs become the method, because not a lot of people are necessarily paying attention to the grants program that's coming out of the governor's office in Georgia, right? And that's also difficult to organize around in some ways, right? Because it's localized, but it's not. So, but yeah, capital is going to flow to the path of least resistance in that way, and elected officials and the enablers will allow it.
And I just wanted to, Hiram posted this: surveillance capitalism, the ways in which private human experiences are collected, computed, and sold off to private businesses as behavior prediction technology. Leave it to Hiram to like succinctly put it into a chat. And he shared, thank you, Hiram, because he did send a really in-depth report that his organization put together, that kind of looked at a lot of this as well. And we don't have a ton of time, but is there anything that either of you saw like in the reading of this that we just want to point out to people? And Jared can share the link in the show description, and all the things.
I didn't get to get too much into it and give it the review that it deserves, but what stood out immediately is what we've been hearing Ed detail for the last better part of the show, that there is and has been an increasing intensifying relationship between these private corporations and tech companies and the state, to create surveillance with big data and again, private surveillance. And it's like the microcosm of what, Dick Cheney and them were trying to, really ramp up 20, 30 years ago, which is just full privatization of every goddamn bit of state apparatus. and intensifying it, even as Ed, you've been laying out, even if it's not really doing what it claims to do. They're just developing a lot of there's a lot of energy and capital going to putting us all under every bit of surveillance, and even as, you know, like sort of figuring it out on the way while they make themselves a whole bunch of money and give themselves all the legal framework and justification and narrative framework and justification for doing it. I mean, it's and then we do. I'm guilty of it in many ways myself, of participating in my own surveillance. We're invited to do it. In fact, I just had a conversation with some colleagues about, you know, again, when our university sold off our email to Google, and it just puts all of us per keystroke under the surveillance of all. I mean, they can call it's just for advertising and so on and so forth, but we don't know that. It literally says in the fine print, we don't really know what they're doing with the data that we're selling, you know, so.
Yeah. So I think the report is excellent. The only thing I would say is that, you know, I think it's also, you know, as I've said, I think it's worth thinking about police tech in the broader question of policing among multiple agencies. You know, Mizue Izeki, who's the head of the Surveillance Resistance Lab, she is thinking a lot about sort of what this sort of current moment conjuncture is around surveillance, and she, you know, she talks about it as surveillance is governance. Surveillance has become, you know, the sort of the preeminent form of governance now across multiple agencies, not just in policing. And I think that's worthwhile to think about, because we need to situate police within the broader apparatus. And I will say, and this is something that we could talk about, you know, this needs more research, but, you know, this is one of the interesting things about the cop city that's being developed in New York City, or the expansion that was recently announced by Eric Adams, is that, you know, the city of New York has had a police training center with sort of a simulated urban area cop city since 2015. They started construction on it in 2009. They finished it in 2015. So this expansion that Eric Adams announced, what it actually is bringing in the police and enforcement bodies within non-police agencies into the police training center and under the supervision of the NYPD for their training. But we think also for data sharing and increased data sharing among New York City's agencies, tying that sort of the apparatus and infrastructure together under the NYPD within this expansion. So that's what I'll name there. And then Jared, to your humility with being a part of this, we all are, you know, because all this is coercive. We don't really have a choice. And that is part of the problem and part of what we're trying to, in terms of making these problems legible, that's what we're trying to think through collectively and how we build power against them. Because, you know, one of the things we talk about at the Surveillance Resistance Lab is, you know, building power, not paranoia. But also thinking about how we resist these technologies and think about sort of communities of care using abolitionist praxis, where we actually challenge and support each other, or we challenge the surveillance and we support each other in proactively having really good digital security practices, really good digital hygiene practices, so that we minimize the data that's being collected and made available to a variety of agencies and corporations that are then going to use it to, you know, harm us in different ways.
Digital hygiene.
All right, so I just want to make it clear. So, so Ed, you know,
Ed gonna need at least a quarterly show on I mean, you
look, I promised y'all. I said we bringing somebody on, and y'all are gonna be blown away. And I have once again proven to be a woman of my word. I am
at
impressed
minimum.
I listen. At minimum,
just come on back. I mean, we just do this again. Yeah. I mean, and all the links. I think I've tracked everything. All the links, everything referenced has been put in the show description, so we can all review some of the work and bring him back and bring Hiram back when we have a chance to really review the report his group put together. And you know, because
that's the plan.
You know, we always need more.
You don't read, beloved.
You know. You know.
So before we wrap, because we've got like 13 minutes.
Yeah.
So this all, of course, ties into what's going to happen next. And one of the things that we also talk about all the time is this presentation of a future fascism that we are supposed to be so fearful of that we have to vote blue no matter who in November, because their fascism is not as bad as the fascism that's going to come if Trump wins and Project 2025 and Agenda 47 and blah, 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 blah. And so I wrote another piece that was actually edited by, like, I swear my editor at Public Square, love you, Josie. She be getting at me, man. That thing, she chopped it up, but that's her job, is to make sure that when the piece gets published, it is fully what it needs to be. So I wrote an op-ed about Kamala Harris. And part of the reason that the op-ed was written is really because this focus that I am seeing now on Kamala Harris and what to me appears to be like just a complete rewriting of who she is in order to sell her as the better version of Biden, who can beat Trump because Trump is the bigger problem. And we have to, we have to save democracy, and we have to stop Trump. I don't know how we save democracy by putting someone on the ballot that nobody voted for, but that's a whole other path. But there is so much about Kamala Harris, and then this addition of Tim Walz, who for some reason everybody seems to think was like her selling out to the left because we didn't want Shapiro. But I don't know, does anyone know that like there was literally a press release from the Zionist community in Minnesota who was so excited that Tim Walz was the pick because he's been so supportive of their community. Like all these things that just don't get, they're just not being talked about. And I think part of this conversation and the thing that I want people to really understand is these are the conversations that they don't want us to have. Because all of these things that Ed just talked about have been growing in the last 3 years under Biden, the Democratic president. And it is important for people to understand that this stuff matters. So, I don't know if you all have any feedback. Thank you, Raul, for noticing the graphic. I made that myself. Woohoo.
It's fly. It's definitely fly.
Because I was like, is she though? Is she for the people? Is she really? And so I don't know if we want to chop it up for a little bit about, the piece and the things we talk, what I kind of cover in it. I'm happy to do that. But I do, folks, if you can, go check out Public Square, read the piece, let me know what you think, and sign up for the newsletter because we're trying to grow the audience for Public Square as well.
I think that I don't know, Ed, if you had a chance to read it or have any thoughts on this, but please, and I'll defer to you for now. I would just want to say I want to encourage everybody to read it. It's in the link is in the show description, and then we revisit it with more as we'll need to over the next few weeks and months anyway. what you've argued there, because the narrative that I think has been becoming increasingly sophisticated and well worked from the Democratic Party is that there are significant differences between what they and Trump are willing and able to do, that the world will be significantly better. And now with Walz, with all this energy and this sort of vibe of a tough guy willing to, talking about, I'm ready to debate everybody, whatever, is bringing an energy that I'll admit is always appealing from the standpoint of well, it has a certain appeal. But the argument against what you've written in here about what they've done, I mean, first of all, you remind us that for all this stuff that Tim Walz called the national cops on the protesters after George Floyd. So he's standing up there now like, I'm this guy and I'm that. So I think we all need more time to digest what you've written, to get it, sign up for the Public Square joint, and then we'll come back and talk more about it. But Ed, what would you like to say about it?
I would just say that I think in terms of surveillance, the surveillance apparatus that we have has been a bipartisan affair. The different support that is from the parties has looked different. This is one, thing that Alec does a really good job in his piece, is pointing out the way in which this is a reform. Police body cameras were a reform pushed by Democrats mostly, right? So the surveillance apparatus and the increasing of state power and state violence in that way has been very much a bipartisan commitment, in the same way that mass incarceration was and is, right? So I think the only thing I would say is that I think it's just, being keen to the rhetoric and the differences in terms of how sort of the attempt at getting consent is suggested and named by the parties, and how coercion looks differently. But in terms of surveillance technologies and surveillance, right, both parties are pushing this hard. And for both parties, what this is doing is undermining democratic practices and processes in order to ensure and increase their control.
Right on. I mean, I think that oh no, I can't. I think that what Renee you have here at the end is just a good thing to sort of wrap up on, and sort of an emphasis of what Ed just said. The lesser evil tactic will succeed as long as the voters' memory is short. Mainstream media's complicity continues, and organizing around electoral politics fails to elucidate the consistency of policies created, supported, and implemented by both parties. Understanding this will enlighten voters on how little changes as the country's administration alternates between these two parties. The possibilities for political education are endless, and organizers must work to dismantle propaganda rather than just mobilizing for ballot access and then for votes in November. This campaign is selling a previously unpopular candidate who supports cops, capitalism, imperialism, and genocide. Further, Harris and Walz are running on the ticket of a political party that works with its opponent to prevent any significant improvement to the material conditions of the majority of people in this country. For the next 3 months, the duopoly candidates will scream about freedom and democracy while being entirely antithetical to both. These are the options there are other options worth considering, because simply put, Kamala Harris ain't it, and Walz does not help. So, yeah.
Those are the two.
Now listen, that's cool.
I got the vibes. Those are the two paragraphs that she didn't change. Whoop, whoop. So that's all me. I'm gonna take all.
No, it had to be. Yeah, take all the credit. It had to be. Well, it had to be. That part has to be allowed to be made clear.
Yeah.
So,
and it's important, right? Because one of the things that I think, with the Zoom calls and all these things, like this highlighting of like this mass organizing behind Kamala and to support Kamala, and it's all about. All of this organizing is all about pointing to be afraid of Trump And as long as you're afraid of Trump, you can recognize that you have to vote for like none, even her yelling at protesters, right, who are simply trying to get people to acknowledge that there are people dying on the other side of the world while you all are playing music and getting baited to give songs and like all this nonsense. And her response to this outcry of humanity, like a request, screaming for someone to acknowledge the humanity of the Palestinian people, was, if you want Trump to win, then say that. Like, that's her response to it. And I think it really is important as organizers who are serious about the fact that this system, this political system that we live under, does not work. It is important to add that political education to this. We have to start getting people to understand that the system, and I said the system doesn't work, it works the way it's supposed to work, that the system is this is what it is, right? And they want it to be this way so that we are all suffering under the boot of capitalism. And we have to have these conversations. You know, one of the things that I've said it before when Claudia was on, one of the reasons I really love when I get the PSL emails is because they always add a political education piece to it. There's always an article, a video, or something so that you can understand socialism and learn, right? And it's something that is so missing, you know, in all of these conversations, because people just talk about these surface things like, you know, well, Kamala's not as bad. I'm more afraid of Trump, and Kamala's better for women and all these things. And I'm like, yo, people are dying. Like, literally, people are dying. And if we can't start having these conversations from a different level, where we are looking at how capitalism is killing humanity, literally, and all of these other things, it's just being put in front of you so that you can pretend like at least it's a little bit better. Nothing's a little bit better. And getting a little bit better when everyone else is dying, in my opinion, is like not helpful, right? It's just not useful to anything. But I do, you know, I really want people to read it, and maybe it'll help have these conversations with others about why we should be looking at this Kamala Walz, you know, ticket and really asking some legitimate questions about what they're actually putting before you as, you know, the campaign that's gonna like save democracy, when it's only a campaign because they completely obliterated democracy. Like, I just feel like there's some conversations that need to be had that are not being had.
So you're for Claudia. At the moment, I'm very interested to see what happens in the next couple days and weeks. If there's a new announcement made that some are expecting that might shake this up.
I know.
But for what you just said and other reasons at this point, why not? I mean, really, why not?
I'm gonna need, and listen, I'm registered Green Party, so I don't want people to think that I don't have, like, you know, I like Dr. Stein. I think that the platform is good. I like the things that they talk about, but you know, it is really hard for me to overlook Claudia de la Cruz and what she brings to the table as a person, as an organizer, as an educator, the way she is able to just teach you something in answering a question, right? So I'm having a real struggle because I am Green Party, but I really like Claudia, right? So I'm going to defer from answering right now. And they're both on the ballot in Jersey. So, you know, I'll have to make a decision eventually. And I'm
not telling no tea.
And I wish there could be a united front, like Daruba is always saying we need to do, because that would make things a lot easier, right? Like, it would be so much easier if all of us who are sick of the system can coalesce under one candidate who is actually about people, right? because then maybe you can push something. One of my, and we're going to run out of time, but I want to quickly mention it, is so on Status Coup, Jordan interviewed the uncommitted, one of the leadership members of the uncommitted movement. And, you know, she's Rashida Tlaib's sister. And she was very much like, well, you know, we just don't feel like there's a path with the third party and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, well, why'd you just say that? Because you just gave away all of your, like, everything that you all just organized for. You basically just threw out the window. And then of course, on Twitter, Kamala's press guy says, well, she's not going to do an embargo because she supports the rights of Israel to defend itself. So then now the sister is on Democracy Now! And she has to backtrack and say, like, you know, well, we're just not sure if we're going to be able to support this ticket. Well, it's like you already set yourself up. Like, and I just wish people could see how devious this whole political setup is, right? Because they just want you to slip just once. And once they know you're not going to do anything that's actually going to be a problem for them, they don't care about your opinion anymore. They're done. They have no reason to cater to you because you've already said you're going to go along and you're going to fight within their bubble. And it's just unfortunate to lose that type of groundwork after everything that they've done. So, you know, we'll see what happens with uncommitted. Maybe they'll see another path, but I'm curious to see like how that works. But we're gonna run out of time. We got 3 minutes.
Yeah, we gotta go. We gotta
go.
Stretch and hydrate for Warrior Class. Ed, big thanks for coming through. Big thanks to all the remixers who are here live today. Those who see this later, please do like, share, subscribe, support our Patreon, support the new Remix Morning Show channel. All the links are in the show description. Please subscribe, do all of that. We went well over the 50, so thanks everybody. But let's keep that going, and we will continue on with Warrior Class next. Sundays with the Ear Doctor, and I'll be back Monday with a special on Mumia Abu-Jamal, Free Them All, Political Prisoners. Peace, everybody. Only if you're willing to fight for it, as Fred Hampton used to say, and we'll see you next week. Back time right here with more Saturday with Renee.
Yo. We wait all week and all day for more Saturdays with Renee.